Winter is coming. Granted, we still gotta get through the rest of spring and summer and fall, but it is coming. And it will be kicked off with an epic battle against a White Walker in November. Apparently, Jon Snow wasn't available, so Debbie Mucarsel-Powell has stepped up and picked up the sword to fight undead Senator Rick Scott come November. Debbie was born in Ecuador on January 18th, 1971, and when she was 14, her family fled Ecuador's communist government and ended up in Miami. In Miami, she grew up for a time in a one-bedroom apartment she shared with her parents and her three siblings while she worked at a donut shop through high school and college. She got a bachelor's in poli-sci from Pitzer in 1992 and a master in international political economy from Claremont in 1996. She then worked for various nonprofits like the Florida Zoo, Coral Restoration, Development for Florida International University, then eventually became president and then dean of Florida International University School of Medicine. In 2016, she decided to make a bid for Florida State Senate, but that was unsuccessful. She was like, maybe the problem was I didn't aim high enough. So then in 2018, she decided to run for U.S. Congress. And in an incredibly surprising upset, she won, becoming the first woman to represent Florida's 26th district and the first person from Ecuador in Congress. I gotta admit, researching for Debbie was a little frustrating because she's very new to the political scene. And normally politicians have a lot more compiled information on statements they've made and bills they've sponsored and co-sponsored and what they voted for and against, and that makes my research easier. But she's very new, and so she hasn't had a whole lot of time to do a whole lot. Nobody's really taken the time to do those kind of write-ups on her. And here I was like, man, I'm gonna have to go scroll through Bill Tracker and try to find every relevant bill amongst all the irrelevant bills that she's voted on. But then I did happen to find a site that had compiled all of the information, all the big stuff that she's voted on in her stances, and it was Heritage Action for America, which is just an extreme right propaganda outlet. And they did exactly what I wanted. They laid out every major bill she's voted on and how she voted for it. And of course, they're trying to spin it like she's, ruining America, but they do such a bad job. They're like, man, she voted to make prescription drugs affordable, and that's socialism. Boo! So I want to give a shout out to Heritage Action for America for doing my work for me on this research and doing such a bad job at making people look bad. In fact, they're so bad at it that I would honestly recommend people use them to go research their own candidates. You can go in knowing that they are writing all of this to make any Democrat look as bad as possible and any Republican look as good as possible. And then you read shit like, oh, Debbie voted to protect healthcare access for Americans. Boo! Not even joking, they have a little thumbs down about how they feel about everything. But if you can go through and read all that and be like, I know they're painting this candidate in the worst possible light and they still look pretty good, probably a good indication that they're not that bad. So I'm using their list exclusively as a source for her stance on the issues just because I find it that fucking amusing. So Debbie voted for amnesty for millions of migrant workers. Boo! Fuck the people who put food on your table. She voted in favor of the Bipartisan Budget Act of 2019. Boo! Why would you vote for something that both parties worked on together to make sure that the government doesn't shut down? She had the audacity to vote to codify DACA to make sure that immigrants who came here undocumented as small children and have lived here their entire lives would have some amnesty to stay in the country that they've always lived in. Boo! Fuck them kids. She voted for the so-called Equality Act, which would update the Civil Rights Act to protect LGBTQ people. Boo! She voted to restore net neutrality so private internet providers can't throttle your speeds or charge you astronomical prices. Boo! She voted to not ban transgender people from the military. Boo! She voted for the infrastructure bill. Boo! She voted to impeach Donald Trump. Double boo! She's also voted for women's bodily autonomy and to protect free and fair elections. It's just awful. So thank you, Heritage Action for America, for compiling a list to show us just how awful Debbie is. These are things we want to know because now she's running for Senate. And she's running against none other than the displaced skinwalker Rick Scott. And while the Tim Burton character that got forgotten on the cutting room floor is still favored to win because Floridians identify with face-eating zombies, there's been some updates that make Democrats and Debbie Mucarsel-Powell optimistic. See, first, she's got some really good things going for her. She's a native Spanish-speaking immigrant, which resonates with, most of Florida. And while the Cuban communities tend to vote more conservative because Republicans keep telling them that the Democrats are the socialistic, communistic, expialidocious party and that's scary to them, they can relate to Debbie coming from a similar background that they came from, and she can relate to them and their fears as well. Rick has also never been overly popular with anyone, because Rick, despite having massive amounts of money and throwing tens of millions of dollars at every one of his own elections, and having that all-important R next to his name, he has still never managed to win an election by more than 1 or 2%, likely due to the fact that he has the charisma and appearance of a feral ghoul. Now you take her relatability and his late for a Walking Dead casting call aesthetic, and you combine that with the fact that abortion is going to be on the ballot in Florida in 2024, suddenly there's reason to feel like Sean just might show up with his cricket bat after all. Now this is a vitally important development because abortion access is popular across party lines. In fact, 150,000 of the signatures to have abortion rights as a ballot initiative this November were registered Republicans. And we've seen it in a number of other states where you put abortion on the ballot and people show up. And this is what we need everybody to remember and do, is show up and vote down ballot. Even if you're one of those people where you're like, I'm not going to vote for Biden and I'm not going to vote for Trump because everything's the same and nothing matters. This matters. Down ballot matters. This is not the same. There's no comparison between people like this. And you've got to remember that there is 100 senators, 435 members of Congress, and thousands of state and local politicians that affect your life astronomically more than the one president who can't write bills, who can't pass legislation. And currently the two most vulnerable Republican senators is Ted Cruz and Rick Scott. People everybody hate. So remember that no matter how you feel about the shitty presidential candidates we have, no matter how much you feel like your vote doesn't matter and nothing ever changes, this is what changes things. These are the votes that matter. There is real candidates all up and down the ballot from school board to senator that are real people that want to bring about real change. There's ballot referendums all over the country that represent the change that we want. But those candidates and those referendums and ballot initiatives need all of us to quit our bitching, get off of our ass, and go vote for them. All of them. Every last fucking one of them. People who vote left leave portions of their down ballot blank 80% of the time, which is asinine. Like, what the fuck are you doing, people? If you don't feel that you're well enough educated on the referendums and initiatives and candidates, Google it. Do a little bit of research. It's your goddamn civic duty. We can't sit here and bitch about how nothing ever changes and nothing's going well and everything's going to hell if the peak of our political engagement is bitching on social media and voting for just the president every 4 years. So I know a lot of people are hell-bent on voting third party and whatever. I'm not going to try to talk you out of that, but do that. And when you do, vote down the rest of the fucking ballot, because not every candidate is the lesser of two evils. Ballot initiatives and referendums do things, but they can only do that if you fucking vote for them. In Florida, as many places across the country do, you have that opportunity. So Florida, I hope you show up to not only protect women's bodily autonomy, but also to vote to replace secondhand Slender Man with a candidate who actually wants to represent you.